you all for inviting me to join you all tonight. Just a little bit about the Postal Inspection Service. If we can go to the next slide. People always say, "Who are you guys?" And this is from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. We are America's oldest law enforcement agency. We were established by Benjamin Franklin in 1772, prior to the United States even becoming a country. We are tasked with protecting the U.S. Postal Service, its assets, employees, infrastructure, customers, and enforce the laws to defend the nation's mail system from illegal or dangerous use. And part of that is some of the things that we do is not just check fraud and identity theft, but that is including, if you go to the next slide, please. There's a little bit about us with Ben Franklin. If you can go to one more. Thank you. Violent crimes, we tend to have a lot of robberies of our facilities and personnel. The middle picture is us working with our BDS systems, keeping anthrax and other things such as ricin out of the U.S. mail. We do a lot of security during civil unrest, and also mail fraud investigations. And we also are responsible for pulling all narcotics out of the U.S. mail. That bottom left picture is of a music star named Stitches who likes to rap about using the U.S. mail to ship narcotics. So we're very busy. We do a lot of different things. People don't necessarily know who we are. We are out here. We are working. We actually have an office that I supervise in our Norfolk area. We're a bit smaller agency, but we work with our federal partners quite a bit. So what I'm here to talk to you tonight, consumer protection, basically protecting yourselves from mail theft, how to report mail theft, and what the Postal Service is doing to stop different types of mail theft, because it's very prevalent in our area. We see a lot of mail theft and deal with primarily with mail theft in Norfolk and the Richmond areas. So there's different types of mail theft. There's what's called volume attacks, and that's what we handle mostly. And volume attacks can be various different types of theft. Volume attacks are where 5 or more pieces of mail are stolen. Residential boxing, that's when your mail is stolen from your residence, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Phishing is when people fish out of the blue collection boxes. We have postal vehicle break-ins, which is fairly common. And then people actually burglarize a post office to steal the mail. I can say down in your area, we haven't had much of that. That's more of a rural Virginia problem. We have robberies, of course, porch pirates, which everybody hears about in the news around the holiday season, and internal mail theft, either by employees or a mailroom compromise at a business or a facility. So what are thieves looking for when they're stealing your mail? I will tell you that primarily they are looking for your checks, canceled checks, anything with your banking information, credit cards, pre-approved credit applications. We see a lot of those being stolen, anything essentially that can be used to either access your money, access your bank accounts, or to steal your identity or use your credit. And who's stealing mail? So for you folks down in Norfolk, it's a little bit different in Norfolk and Richmond than you see in other parts of the country. Or even in the state of Virginia, if you go out west, you see a lot of individuals. It's not very organized, and you've got a lot of individuals that are stealing mail. Where we are in our area, we see a little bit more street gangs and organized groups that are stealing mail. They're very sophisticated in how they're doing it. They're very connected on social media, and it's a very organized group of people. We also see employee theft, not necessarily down your way, maybe more in Northern Virginia. And then something that doesn't impact us as much as it used to is with the restructuring of the Postal Service, which you may have read about in the news. Airline employees no longer handle the U.S. mail. It is actually prepped in our processing facility and goes straight to the tarmac and loaded on airplanes, where previously it was handled by various airline employees, and we experienced quite a bit of theft at Richmond Airport, but that has been mitigated with some of the streamlining of the Postal Service. So why do they want your information? It's easy money. What we're seeing is this transition from folks that are involved in narcotics or violent crime to what's called cooking checks. Basically, fabricating checks that they're stolen out of the mail and mobile depositing those at banks because it's easy money and it's safer than being involved in violent crime or selling narcotics. We're seeing a lot of credit card theft and re-encoding. When a credit card is stolen from the mail, it's then re-encoded and into a blank card and used that way. But I would say some of it is bank and credit card statements for account takeovers, which, you know, we'll talk a little bit about later, but the banks have done a really good job in preventing account takeovers. Really what they're looking for when they're stealing your mail is your checks to cash. So what are we doing to combat this? Central Virginia, Southern Virginia, Norfolk, all along the 64 corridor, Richmond, a lot of folks have what I refer to as unsecured curbside delivery, right? Your mailbox is down at the curb and letter carrier drives through your neighborhood and doesn't dismount from their vehicle and is putting mail into mailboxes. And basically what happens is then those boxes are targeted by what we call red flag bandits, right? So when you're in the morning, you leave for work or you're going out to do your errands, you put your mail in your mailbox at your curb, and you put the red flag up for the letter carrier to know that there's mail to take. That is a signal to mail thieves that there's something in that box to take. Conversely, in the evening, maybe you don't take your mail in right away, it gets dark out, you wait till the next morning, thieves drive through neighborhoods and they just drive along and the passenger just pulls the mail right out of the mailboxes. What we've been doing to combat that is try to convert people to what's called an NDCBU, a secured mode of delivery. And here's an image. This is in Richmond where we converted a housing complex to secure NDCBUs. These are hard to pry into. A lot of people, thieves don't want to take the time to use a crowbar to try to get into these. And the Postal Service has rules with new building communities. If you live in a new residential community, you probably have one of these as your mail receptacle. And that's because the Postal Service has put in place that all new housing communities must use NDCBUs. And part of that wasn't necessarily to stop mail theft, but more for cost savings, because it's a cost savings for fuel and overtime to just have the carrier deliver to these secure cluster boxes as opposed to driving up and down the street delivering to unsecured curbside delivery. With that being said, we do work with businesses in different residential areas that if they're not using NDCBUs and they're having a mail theft problem, we will work with individuals to convert areas to NDCBUs so that they'll have that secure mode of delivery. Other types of volume attacks, we see this more in Richmond than Norfolk. Postal vehicle break-ins, those long life vehicles, the little tin trucks that drive around delivering mail, they're not very secure. They are called long life vehicles. Their shelf life was 20 years. Majority of them have been on the road for almost 40 years now. The Postal Service is long overdue for new vehicles. They're very easy to break into. There's no secure wall between the cab of the vehicle and the back, so someone can shatter out a window and easily climb in and steal trays of mail. And we do have a problem with that in Richmond. It happens almost weekly up here. Same thing with the ProMaster vans. If you have a ProMaster delivering, I don't know if it's a generational thing. We have a lot of what's called sneak thefts, where those vans are left unlocked and the trays and mail are stolen. And then we say to the carrier, why didn't you lock your van? They said, well, the battery's dead in my key fob. And then you're kind of like, did you just hit the door lock? And they're like, oh, I didn't realize I could do that. I swear it's a generational thing. I don't know, our younger carriers were unaware that you could just lock your door. So the Postal Service is moving to what's called NGDVs, next generation vehicles. 250,000 of these vehicles are going to be rolling out in the next 2 years across the country. Norfolk is actually a test site for these vehicles, and they are electric vehicles. The charging stations were actually installed a couple weeks ago at the Norfolk Main Post Office in the LDC, which used to be the Norfolk Processing Plant on Church Street. And they're going to be in the back. We are a test site for these new vehicles. They're not the most attractive vehicles, but one thing they are is tamper-proof. So you can't break in very easily. And there is a secure wall between the cab and where the mail is stored in the back of the vehicle. They also have a camera system that records for an hour after it's parked. It has a 360 camera system. So if someone does attempt to break in or it does gain access to the vehicle, we'll have that recorded. And then we have what's called phishing. And phishing is primarily what happens with blue collection boxes. This is when someone uses fly paper or duct tape, you can see in the right-hand corner, and they put the phishing device down the mail slot and pull mail back out. We usually know when someone's phished because lots of times these devices get stuck in the box or there's a sticky substance, and the post office will report to us a potential phishing. What we're doing to combat that, the Postal Service has transitioned to what's called high security boxes. And some of those boxes have been deployed down in the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area, not so much in Richmond yet. Those boxes, when you pull, you may have seen them when you go to mail something, you pull the door down, you'll see like teeth, almost like shredder teeth, and it takes your letter in, but nobody can fish back out. And that is a new set of technology that's being deployed nationwide. There's 150,000 approximately collection boxes nationwide. So it's taking the Postal Service a little bit of time to get these installed, but these new boxes are being rolled out. And then we have pry attacks, which are also a very overt way of stealing mail. And these pictures are from Richmond, where someone comes through. These boxes are very easy to pry. I could do it myself if I really wanted to. You can use it sometimes with a butter knife, a crowbar, and they pop the boxes open to steal mail. Once again, with these high security boxes that are rolling out, they're pry proof. It's almost impossible to pry in. They're very difficult. I've seen where people have attempted to pry into them down in Norfolk and here. We have some up here, and they're unable to get those doors open. So they are working. They are very secure, and those are some of the ways that we're trying to prevent the mail theft. I will tell you though, when pries happen, there's always collateral damage. You can see here to the right that the news crews were reporting that ballots were stolen from these boxes, and that's not the case. When these boxes are broken into, people are stealing from them. They are primarily looking for checks or any identifiable information that they can use to steal your identity. Now, with that being said, with the installation of these boxes, usually around an election cycle, which we're getting ready to enter, we're told to stop replacing them only because there is a lag time between pulling the boxes up and putting the new ones in. And there's always this concern that, we want to be able to have everybody in America have access to a method to mail in their ballot. So you may see some slowing of the installation over the next few months. And then we have what's called postal arrow keys. And this is a major problem in your area and in mine. And this is a stealth way of stealing mail. And what this is the bad guys are obtaining postal arrow keys, which unlock the boxes. So I can have all those high security boxes in the world, but as long as these folks have keys, they can access the mail. And this is primarily the problem that the Postal Service is dealing with nationwide right now, are arrow keys, lost or stolen arrow keys. Arrow keys used to be accountable to a carrier, and I'm going to show you what they look like. It's public. This isn't state secrets. But these are images from cameras that I have up. All these cases are adjudicated at this point, but these are cameras when I suspect someone is stealing from a collection box, and usually that comes in from customer complaints, where folks' checks are missing, they've been altered in cash, and we get the complaint. We start talking to the victims, and they'll say, well, I mailed my check from this blue collection box, and then we'll suspect that we have an arrow key compromise, and that's when we start placing cameras and other things up, trying to figure out who may be stealing from us. So this is what a postal arrow key looks like. I ask if you ever find one somewhere, please call me immediately. You're going to have my contact information. It's at the end of my presentation. They are accountable. It used to be a fireable offense if you lost an arrow key. Now the Postal Service is, hands out corrective action. These are lost commonly, and there's other means by which people are using these keys or obtaining these keys. They can be used for the NDCBUs also, the secure mailboxes. So it's a high priority for the Postal Service to have control of these keys or get control of these keys. And this is what a counterfeit key looks like if you ever stumble upon one of these. You can't take them to Lowe's or Home Depot to replicate them, but you can make them with a Dremel tool. You can make them with a 3D printer. So we recovered quite a few of these in our investigations down in the Norfolk area. And this is where we're really struggling. And I'll be very honest about it. Violent crime to commit mail theft. The majority of the keys that are missing in the Norfolk area are due to armed robberies of our letter carriers. And this has become a very dangerous thing. In FY 2022, my team between Richmond and Norfolk had 0 robberies, armed robberies of letter carriers. In 2023, we had 23 armed robberies of letter carriers, 19 of those in the Norfolk metro area and the other 4 in Richmond. This is a serious problem down in the Norfolk area. We work with the FBI Safe Streets, DEA Task Force, and ATF. We've been very, very successful, and I can't elaborate on who, but we've recently indicted 11 individuals in March who are responsible for a large number of these robberies. This terrifies me. The fact that we're now robbing letter carriers for those arrow keys to commit mail theft. I can tell you a carrier in Raleigh, North Carolina was shot in the face in September for her arrow key. I had a carrier a month ago in Richmond who was pistol whipped for his arrow key and robbed. He ended up having to have 8 staples in his head. This is just awful that folks have now resorted to robbery to obtain those keys. And I'll tell you, those keys have a street value of $10,000. So once those keys are obtained, the people that are robbing the carriers aren't necessarily keeping them. They're selling them on the dark web, on Telegram, and different platforms to folks outside of Norfolk. So lots of times what we're seeing is the theft in the Norfolk area and Southern Virginia, or people coming from the Carolinas, Florida, Georgia, up the 95 corridor to steal in this area. So what happens when folks get your checks, right? And I'm going to go a little bit about what we used to see and what the new trends are. The checks are either immediately sold, usually on Telegram, Instagram, and then sometimes they're shipped across the country, other areas of the country, or they're counterfeited by what's called cooks. And then you have your cashers. Cooks are the folks that are recruited to counterfeit the checks. Typically, they're counterfeited using Photoshop, and they're mobile deposited into bank accounts. And this is where it gets tricky for law enforcement trying to track some of this, right? Because mobile deposit isn't as easy to prove as opposed to somebody walking into a bank or being on an ATM video camera. There's a lot of people recruiting each other to cash checks, and it's become very convoluted for law enforcement trying to track some of these folks down. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution of check cashing, and I do this in 2 buckets. I do pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. So what we saw pre-pandemic is a lot of recruiting over Facebook and Instagram, text messages back and forth, very open conversations about check cashing. The checks were typically forged, not counterfeited, meaning that they were scraped or acetone was used to rewrite or retype over an original check. The folks that ran these scams would be very flashy on social media with unblocked access to their social media pages. So you would see them on the internet. Once we had an idea who was doing these scams, we'd see them post pictures of money and different things and talk about all the money they were making scamming. So it was much easier for us to catch folks. The other issue that we were dealing with is folks didn't cash the checks themselves. They didn't go into the bank. They would recruit homeless folks. And you can see down below this gentleman in the orange traffic vest was somebody that was recruited at Monroe Park here in Richmond, given a traffic vest and a check, and was told to go cash it at the bank. And then he gets a $200 cut of that cashing. The check amounts were rather low, maybe between $600 and $5,000 that was being cashed. And that was kind of how the scam ran. Unfortunately, what would happen is, the banks would catch on, call us, and the local PDs, we'd run in and catch a homeless person trying to cash a check, and they didn't know who recruited them. They don't have a cell phone. They just know that they were supposed to meet someone around the corner, give them $4,000, and they got to keep $500. This was difficult for us to handle also because the judges don't want to put homeless people in jail, and because they're doing what they're doing because they need the money. So this is what we were seeing pre-pandemic. And this is a campaign that my team here in Virginia put together prior to the pandemic, where we were trying to stop what was dubbed Operation Homeless. That's what we called it, because we wanted to stop the exploitation of homeless people being used to cash checks. So we would go take these flyers, we had little cards printed up with our information, and we would put them in bagged lunches. We would go to homeless shelters. We met with different police units who work with the homeless shelters between Richmond and Norfolk, trying to get the message out that you could go to jail for cashing checks. And we actually had a very successful campaign going. And then the pandemic hit. So what happened during the pandemic is the check cashing kind of stopped. And we didn't see such a large amount of mail theft because the world came to a stop. And the government then put out the CARES Act. And a lot of people applied for CARES Act funds. We saw this massive uptick of actual identity theft, where individuals were stealing date of birth and social security numbers to commit identity theft to obtain CARES Act money, either SBA money or PUA, things along those lines. So it kind of stopped for a while. And then when the CARES Act money stopped, the check theft went gangbusters in Central Virginia and Southern Virginia. But it's a little bit different now. It's a much more stealth operation. The checks are stolen, which I've talked about the ways that checks are stolen. And everything now is over Telegram. Telegram is an encrypted chat service. Nobody truly knows where their servers are. We think they're in Eastern Europe, which means that law enforcement cannot subpoena or obtain records from Telegram. So unless we catch a bad guy in the act of cashing checks or recruiting people to cash checks somehow, and their phone is open to Telegram, and we're able to seize that phone immediately and preserve those conversations, we're losing those conversations, the recruitment of the gangs coming up to cash our checks, and then the sale of checks over Telegram. A lot of checks move through Telegram, the images, the arrow key sales are moving through Telegram, and it is a super challenge for law enforcement right now. So why check cashing? Like I said, we've seen this transition from a lot of folks who had prior convictions for narcotics or violent crime, who are now cooking checks or involved in check fraud. And basically we've been told it's an easier type of crime. Usually the cashier is not getting immediately caught, even if they are. The check is only for a few grand. You know, the Commonwealth attorneys here in Virginia won't necessarily prosecute them. The U.S. Attorney's Office doesn't want a $5,000 check case. And honestly, there's too many cashiers right now for law enforcement to handle. What I should have mentioned with the evolution of the check cashing, and I'm sorry, I forgot this, is now with mobile deposit, we're seeing those amounts, not just, you know, $500 to $5,000. We're seeing like $5,000 to $75,000 checks. Business checks are really what folks are after. There are larger amounts. And with mobile deposit, it's just become very difficult for law enforcement to track those transactions. And like I said, this one cook who we recently arrested said, this is just easy money. It's easier than my other options in life. And maybe they go to jail for a few years. If they don't have a criminal record, maybe probation. So it's just become very difficult. I want to touch on something real quick before I pass the torch. Fraudulent change of address, and this may be something that you've all experienced. This is where identity thieves were able to go online and change your address and divert your mail to a different address. And I can tell you this happened to my mom. She was she was part of a data breach, some company that she had financial institution actually. And her address was changed from Savannah, Georgia to Waldorf, Maryland. My mom knowing me, the postal inspector called me immediately. And she hadn't gotten mail in a couple of weeks, and then got a notice in the mail from the postal service that our address had been changed. We were able to obviously rectify that. This was prevalent. I mean, I would get a couple hundred complaints about this a week. What we have done when working with the Postal Service, there's now dual, if you go to the next slide, dual authentication now for fraudulent change of address. And this was a way to protect consumers such as yourselves from having your address changed. In the purpose of that change of address is to obtain your financial documents or your identity. I can say that since we've implemented this about a year ago, the Postal Service has really has done some great things with this. With the dual authentication, I have not had one complaint of a fraudulent change of address. So if you ever were a victim of it, please know that we've done a lot to mitigate those fraudulent change of addresses. So what are we charging people with when they steal your mail? Possession of stolen mail, possession of keys and locks, whether stolen or reproduced. So if you reproduce that arrow key, you can be charged with 1704. Fraud and related activity in connection with access devices, aggravated identity theft, bank fraud. We are charging people with Hobbs Act robbery, which has a conviction, a sentencing of 20 years for the armed robberies of our postal carriers. And we also can charge, if those checks move over state lines, transportation of stolen financial instruments. I apologize, that's a mouthful. So, you know, these are the federal charges that we are looking at for the folks that are operating within our area. And it's not all doom and gloom, I promise. We've had a ton of success. These are two press releases for over the last year, one out of Newport News U.S. Attorney's Office, one out of Richmond. I can tell you, you should be seeing some press releases coming out of the Norfolk U.S. Attorney's Office for the robbery convictions. My team is very, very active. We're very proactive, and we're doing the best that we can to mitigate what's happening. It's just going to take some time getting the technology in place with the collection boxes, and I apologize. To get around what's happening with the arrow keys, Postal Engineering is now testing something called e-ArrowLock, where individuals, if they have that arrow key, there's the carriers have a scanner. You need the scanner and the key to open the collection box. And I think the reason why our violent crime has spiked so much down this way is they implemented that technology, testing it this past year in Southern Maryland, DC, and Northern Virginia. And they saw their robbery rates plummet, and I saw my robbery rates skyrocket. A lot of the folks that we are arresting are not necessarily from the Norfolk area. They are from Maryland and DC that are coming down here to exploit the lack of technology that we have down here. e-ArrowLock is coming to us. It just takes some time. There's a lot of collection boxes nationwide. So we do have some good technology that we're putting into place to stop the theft. And this is how we collect our complaints for building our cases. And my contact information is, I think it's on the next slide, maybe. If you go to the next slide. Oh, that's our 800 number and our website. If you are a victim of mail theft or identity theft, please, 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 please either file an online complaint, call this 800 number. It's manned 24/7, 365. You put in your zip code and your complaint, and guess what? You get routed to me. So I personally get these complaints, and then we work them depending on the zip code, whether it's worked in Richmond, our Richmond office, or out of our Norfolk office. But we honestly can't stop these folks and these thieves if we don't know that the crime's happening. So I urge you, if you know anybody who's a victim of mail theft or check theft, please have them file a complaint with us. And below is my email information. I sit in Richmond, but I'm in Norfolk at least once or twice a week. I do keep an office there. If I can ever be of assistance to any of you, please reach out to me directly. Please email me. I give my email and not my phone number because I very rarely at one desk or the other, but I'm very responsive. So please feel free to reach out to me, or you can call our 800 number that is below my email address.
Thank you, Meredith. That was incredible information. I don't know about y'all, but I learned a ton and was glued to my screen. So thank you for your presentation. I am going to go ahead and transition the virtual stage to Susan. And keep in mind, if y'all have questions throughout, feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to get to them shortly after Susan shares her presentation.
Unmute myself. There we go.
There we go.
I know. I have a little dog here, so I'm really hoping he behaves himself. So yeah, I'm kind of going to pick up where Meredith. I'm going to cover a few things, but really from the banking side of things, and right, how do we keep ourselves safe? And you know, I was in the Norfolk market and right up until about a month ago, so I was on the other side of all of this. And there's a lot of tips I want to give you guys that will help you stay safe. And Meredith referred to it, and it used to be, you know, there was other types of fraud, but 60% now of the bank fraud that we have are due to checks. You know, unfortunately, as Meredith shared, we only expected to get increasing. And as you can see on this chart, it's reached, that was a 2023 number of $24 billion in losses. And some banks are really just so inundated with it. I mean, we doubled our staff at Old Point National. Here at Tower, we also have hired in a bunch of people to help with recoveries with other banks. And it's funny, you know, when you think about bank fraud, I researched this and it actually goes before Christ. It started, you know, back years ago. And when, you know, people were sending written documents back, I guess maybe on stone, I'm not sure, but it really does go way back. And unfortunately, a lot of the laws that are around check fraud are also dated. So this Meredith referred to, these are some of the news stories that hit our local news, Channel 3. You go around and see that the U.S. Postal Service bins were taped up after being pried open. And as she alluded to, they're, you know, trying to replace those with more safe and secure boxes. But it's been a big deal. And one of the reasons it's a big deal is because while consumers have largely gotten, you know, using debit, credit, and cash on little checks, businesses still, businesses to businesses are still largely using checks. So even we've had several cases with churches, and they, you know, they pay their vendors and then they go to the blue box and they dump them in the postal box, and then they may not be looking at their account frequently. So by the time they, you know, figure out that it didn't make it to the way to their vendor, it has been stolen and altered or whatever. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples here in a second. There's, you know, 4 major types of fraud, and one is that somebody just takes your check and they just pretend to be you, or they just use their own name and they go into another you know, bank or credit union and they get it cashed. Or they'll take the check and they alter the name of the payee to themselves. They take off, you know, Dominion Power and they put Susan Ralston, and then they take it in and they get it cashed. Or they just endorse it. I'll show you an example of that. But the biggest thing we've seen lately is counterfeit checks, where they're basically creating a whole new check, often with a lot of the same security features that the bank offers. And it's really hard for an average person to detect that. So it's easy when you take it into the bank, they look at it, they're like, oh, this looks like a great check. So they go ahead and cash it. And who's liable for check fraud? It depends, right? So you have an incident on your account. It depends what happens really. And I'll show you, it's fairly complicated, right? You know, a check is a contract. It's a contract. You know, it comes off the bank that the credit union or bank that you bank with. You give it to somebody that's the drawer. You know, you make it payable. You know, that person can actually make it payable to somebody else, and then, you know, then it goes to the bank. And so there's warranties that happen between the banks and the Fed and the banks and the drawers. But with all the check fraud we've had, many of the banks, even the large banks now, are cooperating with each other to try to catch these people. Here's an example of a forged endorsement, and this is an actual, as I say, it was made payable to a company, as you can see. And look on the back, pay to Lisa. And so she was able to negotiate that check, and for $3,100 there. So good payday for her, right? Here's an example of a counterfeit check. And I love to play this game, right? I say, find the 10 differences in this check. And most people will get to 4 or 5 or 6. They look and you can see it's obviously made payable to somebody else. You can see the signature is exact, right? So they're taking that image and they're putting it back on the counterfeit check. So if the bank's looking at a signature card, they're going to see, yeah, that's Mary. All right. That looks like her signature. And the check series looks about the same. Look, they got our logo correct. But let's look at the next one and you'll see all the differences from the stock. So there was actually 10 differences there. And my fraud investigator at Old Point, I think I got up to 9, and she's like, but you missed this. So many banks and credit unions are buying AI technology, artificial intelligence that beyond the human eye is able to look at all these differences. They'll look at, say, the last 3 checks that cleared, and it's able to quickly identify what we would call an exception, right? So now we're going to pull that check and take a look at it. But also look, they also altered the amount, right? Made it another $8,000 more when they tried to cash this check. So it's crazy. Wash checks, as Meredith said, I can go to Dollar Tree, right? Pick up some nail polish remover and take all that ink off of that check and just rewrite it. And so that's what happened in this case. Upped from what, $700 to now $4,000. So here's my tips. I say from the street here is don't write checks. Use electronic payments. Almost every payment that I have, I can turn into an electronic payment. If I can't, for example, my dog sitter or maybe my hairdresser, I can also go on my online bill pay if I have online banking with the bank, which is typically free. And I can issue from that account. And most bill pays will try to do an electronic. You can look at your bill pay and you can see in that, and right underneath the bill payer, you can see whether they send it electronic or not. But what a lot of them are doing now is a one-time debit card. So it's only used for that one transaction and then it's no good. Only use cash apps. I say with people you know and trust. Once that money goes out by Venmo, Zelle, or in fact, I have here at Tower, we have a person that just focuses on Zelle. And again, banks try to cooperate with each other, and the Zelle network is owned by banks. So, we are successful sometimes in recovering money for people, but most times when that money is gone, it is gone. So we limit, for example, at Tower, we only allow people to do $1,000 with Zelle and $3,000 over a 30-day period. So we try to help you limit your exposure. Another idea is to just create a reoccurring ACH. Say it's, again, Dominion Power. You can create an ACH. It comes out, debits out of your account automatically, or you can use their online bill pay option. But what happens to a lot of people is they see the check clear, but they don't really look at that check, right? It clears. If the counterfeiter is clever, they leave it for the same amount, right? So you see the check clear. We had a member the other day with a $40,000 check he had made to the IRS. He owned a business and he saw the 40,000 clear, but he didn't look at the check, and the check was made payable to a person, right? And that person was one of the criminals that Meredith was talking about. I actually look at my account daily. I don't write that many checks, so it's easy to look, but if I do have to write a check, I'm going to make sure it clears, and it clears to the right amount, and it clears to the right, it was cashed by the correct person or entity. One of the things that really kills me is people keep just a load of money in their checking account. I highly recommend that you keep a limited amount. Maybe you have a little bit of emergency fund, but keep the extra money in another account, like a money market account or something. And then if you need to transfer it, you can again use your online banking and put that money in when you need it. But I'm just surprised, people keep, $100,000 in their checking. I'm like, why? And so it's able to clear. Otherwise it would have been an NSF and it would have been returned. Another thing, I highly recommend if you're at Dollar Tree, you can pick up a Sharpie. I have tons of these in different colors. Another thing is I use an ink pen with bleeding ink into the paper. So if I try to take off that ink with nail polish remover, it's going to really smear or not even able to get it off at all. And so that will, they'll go on to the next person with the next easier check. Another thing that's free with almost every online banking I've ever been on is a banking alert, right? So you could set your account up to say it hits a certain balance, and it'll send you an email or it'll send you a text message and say your account is below $500, Susan Ralston, and I'd be like, what? And you can also set it up sometimes with specific amounts to let you know that it cleared your account. Another thing I had happen again, a customer left their checks in their car in plain visibility on the passenger seat and didn't lock the car, and the checks got stolen. And so I say, secure your checks, even in your home. If you have, maybe you're having a party, visitors or whatever, maybe you have a cleaning company that comes in to clean your home, put your checks in a locked box. Do not leave them laying around. And again, if you have a question, something on your account, you can always call your trusted credit union or bank advisor and say, something weird's on my account. Can you help me look at this and see what's going on? Because the sooner we know about it, the better chance we have of recovery of your funds. Many banks and credit unions have a rule that if you have a statement and you have a certain amount of time by state law to take a look at that statement and let us know if there is an error on your account. And if you wait too long, and say it's usually 60 days, but say you waited 6 months and you're like, oh my gosh, I finally realized the IRS didn't receive their payment because I'm getting notices from the IRS. The bank may push back and say, hey, you only had 60 days. Now again, we always try to help. We'll always go back to that other bank and try to recover, but I can tell you some of my cases where I've the money in Meredith referred to it, which is organized crime. They will have that money in that account and out of that account in milliseconds. They know it's coming through. They know when the check's clear, and they will, as soon as it's posted and as soon as it's available, it's going to their, whatever Swiss bank account or whatever, and we are unable to recover those monies. So I say to you, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. We see a lot of popular scams and tricks almost daily at Tower. We have somebody coming in, romance scams. We had a lady who thought she had a Brazilian boyfriend and he needed, money to come to the US so they could get married. And luckily our team is trained by a program I'm going to show you in a second. And, talked her out of that transaction. And, she felt kind of silly, but she's, better to save her money than. Employment scams are very popular, right? You think you're getting a job. What they do is they say, well, we need, we're going to send you money to buy a computer. And they'll accidentally send you too much money. And like, oh my gosh, we sent you $5,000 and we only meant to send you $1,000. Can you just wire that back to me, please? And really appreciate that. And of course, the check bounces and then they have your money, right? The lottery scams. I remember my mother, even as she kind of had some dementia later in life, thought she had won the lottery. And I'm like, Mom, you did not win $1 million. I wish you did. But a lot of those scams, again, they're trying to get good money to replace with a fake check or whatever. Anyway, Meredith said, any way they can gain access to your email or your bank account information. Phishing is very popular, right? We had a couple of customers fall for. They thought they were hiring Geeks on Squad to help fix a problem on their computer. Or another huge popular one is when the Microsoft Office thing pops up, and it's like, your computer, you need to call us right away. When they come into your computer, they steal everything you have, every sign-on, every password, and they do it in seconds. Again, they're downloading as fast as you're like, I just don't know what happened. I just don't, fall for that. Make sure you call a local trusted advisor. Make sure it's, ID them if you have to. Make sure that you know who you are dealing with. Most financial institutions will never call you and say, can you please verify your debit card number? One thing that happened locally here is a text message, right? And what they do is they get the area code and they get, the series of phone numbers that are being issued. And I'll get one, it says your Wells Fargo account had a debit. Please confirm here. When you click that confirm, now they know you're a Wells Fargo customer, right? And they will then call you and try to get more information. So I advise people just hang up, don't take the bait. Your financial institution is not going to call you with stuff like that. Like I say, questions, does it make sense? Does this look right? Is this a person that you normally get a check from? Is this somebody you really know? You can always go online and do a quick web search and find out if this person's real. Is the person a lot of our customers come in with the actual thief on the phone with them, and the thief has convinced them the bank has internal fraud. They're like, don't listen to the bank person. They're the fraudster. We're the people trying to help you out. We're from the, corporate fraud team, right? And so they're lying about that. So do they seem excited? Are they keeping you, on the phone? Are they desperate and they want this money fast because they don't want people like Meredith to find out and then they get arrested? So she referred to, the U.S. Postal Service has a lot of easy ways to report these crimes. Meredith gave you her personal information, which is great. Another service that we do here at Tower is the AARP actually has, if you're a member of the AARP, they have a lot of free information, and they also have a fraud line right there, an 800 number you can call and discuss and say, and they'll help you walk through how to get your money recovered. Or is this really a scam? And see, this latest thing right on their website this morning or yesterday was Amazon imposter. How many of us, shop through Amazon? So we just can't hardly trust anything these days. Another one, which has a lot of for ransomware or other cyber crimes. Again, email compromise is the IC3.gov site. Is a lot of great information there. And a lot of our customers end up going there to file because if you are a victim, we need you to help get these criminals in jail. And as Meredith said, if we can get maybe, you suffered 10, if we can get, she can piece the case together and find out, indeed, this is an organized crime and it's a large crime. And then, we get a lot of attention on that case.